All right, so after I've convinced people that virtual machines make sense for them, frequently I get the question, hey, where should I install this piece of software? So I'm going to talk through this a little bit and give you some basic ideas of maybe this is a good thing to put on your virtual machine, maybe this is a good thing to put on your host. There might be a little overlap between the two groups. You're going to have to make your own judgment because I obviously can't cover every scenario. But hopefully this kind of gets the gears turning and gets you started. First, obviously, we're using virtual machines for a reason, right? So many pieces of software can be sensitive to user account control or antivirus, other kinds of security-related things. And so in that case, if the software is sensitive to those things, put it in the virtual machine because that's the place where we're not using those security features. Now, there's another piece to this. I've found some pieces of software don't play nicely with other pieces of software, and that's a perfect example of something that you should put on your virtual machine because you can take a snapshot before you install that software, just in case it breaks anything. You can always go back. Better yet, you can have a snapshot before you install some of your sensitive software, so you can go back to that let's say blank copy of Windows and branch off of that. So I can have a branch with Rockwell Automation products, and then I can go back and I can make another snapshot that has, say, Omron products, and another one with GE, and another one with who knows what, right? So this way, first of all, we have an easy recovery option, and second of all, we can keep things as separate as we want without having to have 10 different laptops. So kind of related to recovery options, again, is this idea of software that takes a long time to install. I talk about Rockwell. It's gotten a little faster nowadays, but even just a few years ago, it could take a day and a half to install all the Rockwell software you might want. And so in that case, that's something I'm not going to want to repeat if anything ever goes wrong. So to be able to take a snapshot after I put in all that time and effort, really, that's a winning point for me. And then finally, I want to talk about support. If you have maybe there's this one machine in the corner of your shop that you set it up a few years ago, and all of a sudden something goes wrong, and you have to go connect to that again. Well, you're going to want to have access to that older software. So if you use software that's not going to be easy to get access to in a few years, or if it's got a particular configuration that you're not going to remember how to set up, or you're not going to want to spend the time to set it up to support that machine in the corner of the shop, you might want to put that in a virtual machine as well. And we'll talk about archiving and saving a virtual machine state that you can come back to for support purposes. This is also very helpful, I think, for systems integrators because they work with so many different pieces of equipment, and then they're frequently called later, years down the road, maybe 10 years later, and the end user wants the machine builder to be able to support this machine again that they put together. So to have a snapshot or an archived version of this virtual machine that had all the right software and configuration makes it a lot easier, makes it a lot faster to be able to support that old machine. There are definitely times when you don't really want to install on a virtual machine, or rather you want to install on the host machine. The first reason you might want to install on the host is if a piece of software is very resource intensive. If it uses a lot of graphics or if it uses a lot of RAM. The virtualization companies always claim that they can do that high performance, whatever. It's probably going to be easier to do it on your host. So unless there's good reason to put it on the virtual machine, this is a time when you would want to put it on the host machine. If you're installing frequent updates to a piece of software, I think this is another time when it's probably good to think about putting it on your host rather than on the virtual machine. And I say that for a few reasons. First of all, my recommendation is always to take a snapshot before you install a piece of software on your virtual machine. And so if you're updating this all the time, you're taking a whole bunch of snapshots. And you can go back and delete snapshots that you don't need anymore, but it's a little more management. A second thing here is I figure if you're installing updates frequently, it probably doesn't take a whole lot of time to install it, or you wouldn't be doing it. And it's probably also pretty easy to get that software. So those are two reasons why you might want to put it on a virtual machine if either of those things weren't true. But since it's easy to get and quick to install, recovery options are pretty easy if anything ever goes wrong with it. And then the last category, this is maybe a broad category, is Office products. So I'm talking about Microsoft Word or email programs, web browsers, things that you would normally consider part of your Office tasks. First of all, these usually need internet, which I'm advocating not having your virtual machine connected to internet. And second of all, these are probably just going to end up being clutter, especially if you have multiple virtual machines like I do. To have that installed in a bunch of different places is just not very helpful. So to have all of that on your host makes a lot of sense. I hope that helps clarify for you. Certainly sit down and talk through it with your team if you've got something new that you want to be installing and you're not quite sure how to manage it. The more people you have using virtual machines, the more you may want to consider standardizing your approach to where to install this piece of software or that piece of software.